Notorious serial killer the world has ever seen. A monster who slit the throats, then butchered 5 women, all within a square mile of Victorian London. 11 children lost their mothers and a city lived in terror. But no one has ever been caught or charged with these gruesome crimes. Now, more than 100 years later, we finally put Jack the Ripper on trial. Good evening. They may have happened over a century ago, but the crimes of Jack the Ripper still fascinate us. He is Scotland Yard's longest-running unsolved serial killer inquiry. Despite 100 arrests, thousands of hours of police time, the case of Jack the Ripper has remained a mystery. But tonight, we will finally reveal his identity with unprecedented access to Scotland Yard's files from the time. We will use 21st century technology and the latest detection techniques to bring 4 key suspects to trial. For the first time, a studio audience will get the chance to convict Jack the Ripper. The facts of the case are simple. The year was 1888, Queen Victoria was on the throne, and gaslit London was living in fear.
It was the autumn of terror. 5 brutal murders in just 10 weeks. All the victims were penniless prostitutes, all had their throats slit, and all were horrifically mutilated. The murders caused a sensation and sent shockwaves around the world. Over 600 policemen launched one of the biggest manhunts in history. And it all happened within 1 square mile in Whitechapel, London's poorest district. Families of 7 or 8 shared a room in crushing poverty, often living on less than £1 a week. Many women dipped in and out of prostitution, selling their bodies for 4pence or just a stale loaf of bread. Mother of 3, Annie Chapman, was the second to die. In this rare photograph, never before broadcast, she is pictured with her husband John. Within a month, Polly Nichols, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were also dead. The final woman to die was also the youngest. Mary Kelly was found horrendously mutilated. Then, on the 10th of November, the killings stopped. And the Ripper disappeared.
The case is riddled with unanswered questions. Did the victims know each other, or were they randomly plucked off the streets? Why were the bodies mutilated, and what possible motive could the killer have had for such butchery? And most perplexing of all, why did the murders stop so abruptly? Over the years, more than 60 people have been named as the killer, including 2 princes, at least 4 doctors, children's author Lewis Carroll, Dr. Bernardo, even the Invisible Man. Serious investigations revealed just 4 prime suspects, and tonight we put them on trial. We charge Francis Tumblety, Aaron Kosminski, Sir William Gull, and James Maybrick with the 1888 murders of 5 London prostitutes. In the studio, we have a jury of 100 people selected from all over Britain who will make their judgment on who was Jack the Ripper. The proceedings begin with the first of our 4 suspects, the American quack doctor, Francis Tumblety.
When the Ripper struck, Francis Tumblety was a wealthy 55-year-old American staying in London. A colourful conman, he adopted a number of false names and dressed flamboyantly. A quack doctor with no obvious medical qualifications, he made a fortune touring America selling his own concoctions as herbal remedies. His first brush with the law occurred when he was arrested for attempting to abort the pregnancy of a local prostitute. Later, a different patient died in his care. Throughout the 1880s, Tumblety frequently travelled to Europe, where he gained a reputation for collecting female body parts. He returned to the United States in the late autumn of 1888 and died there 15 years later.
Leading the prosecution is James Morton, a former solicitor who has defended members of the notorious Richardson crime family. He is assisted by Nick Warren, who edits a magazine for Ripper enthusiasts. For the defence, we have Angela Rippon, an award-winning broadcaster and journalist. She was, of course, the BBC's first female newsreader. She is assisted by Paul Begg, a respected Ripper historian who has written 2 books on the Whitechapel murders. James Morton, What is your case?
There have been many people whom it's been suggested have been Jack the Ripper. There's Edward VII, Dr. Bernardo. I'm frankly surprised Lord Lucan and Elvis Presley haven't been added to the list. But one man who was there from the start was Francis Tumblety. Why hasn't anyone heard of him? Well, the answer is they had, but papers went missing at Scotland Yard, and eventually a vital piece of evidence was found when an old bookshop in Richmond was closed in the 1990s. Tumblety fits everything. He had a pathological hatred of women. He decided he was going to collect and exhibit human body parts. He was no stranger to the police. I'm going to show you tonight that there is really no doubt that Tumblety, who was in England at the right time for the murders, and the murders stopped when he left, is Jack the Ripper.
Thank you, James. James Morton, your first witness for the prosecution is Paul Gainey. Paul Gainey is a historian and writer who travelled to America to investigate Francis Tumblety's life. Your witness.
Paul, how and when did Tumblety become a suspect?
He's always been a suspect. He was a suspect in 1888. He was in the American press. But it came to light in a letter in 1993 by Chief Inspector John Littlechild, who at the time was in charge of the Special Branch at Scotland Yard. And John Littlechild wrote a letter to George R. Sims, who was a journalist, saying that Dr. Tumblety was a Jack the Ripper suspect.
In fact, there's evidence he or an American doctor at the time of the killings lived down the East End.
That's right. What happened was, on the night of the double murder of Catherine Eddowes and Elizabeth Stride, a landlady in Batty Street was disturbed at 2 o'clock in the morning, which was 15 minutes after the murders, by a lodger coming in. The next morning, this man fled the lodgings and left behind a bloodstained shirt. The landlady described this man as an American doctor, and we believe that is Tumblety.
Tumblety, in fact, was arrested for homosexual offences and absconded his bail and fled to America. What did Scotland Yard do about it?
He was pursued to America by none other than Inspector Walter Andrews. Now, why that is particularly significant is that Walter Andrews is one of the 3 inspectors at Scotland Yard who was investigating the Jack the Ripper killings on the ground at the time.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
Thank you.
Angela, for the defence.
Mr. Gainey, Tumblety was arrested and indeed was in court on the 7th of November for homosexually related activities. Kelly was murdered on the 9th. How could he have committed that murder if he was in police custody?
In fact, that is incorrect. What actually happened was somebody was charged with an indecency offence. It wasn't a serious enough offence for him to be held in custody. It's very similar today in modern law. So he had to be bailed within 24 hours.
Is it not clear, though, that if he had been arrested on the 7th, clearly he would have been under police investigation. He would have known that. Is he likely 2 days later to have gone out and committed the horrific murder on Kelly?
This man is a flamboyant self-publicist with a pathological hatred of prostitutes.
But does that make him a killer?
He most certainly was a killer. But we know,
how was he a killer?
We know on record that he'd already killed people in America.
No, he killed one person in America, and that was someone that was malpractice. He did not murder them. He gave them a concoction which killed them, which is rather different. Shall we move on? Batty Street, the lodger. It's well known that Tumblety was a very wealthy man, and he tended, when he came to London, to stay at the Langham Hotel. And in fact, there's evidence that he entertained lavishly when he was in London. What would Tumblety have been doing in Batty Street in Whitechapel? Is there any absolutely indispensable evidence that he was the Batty Street lodger?
It's very clear that at the height of the murders, they were hunting an American.
Yeah, but was it Tumblety?
It certainly was Tumblety.
You know that for a fact?
Yes.
Do we know, though, that the Batty Street lodger was the Ripper? Is there indisputable evidence that he was the Ripper?
I would say that he was in London at the time of the murders. He had a pathological hatred of women.
But was there indisputable evidence that he was the murderer?
Yes, there was, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Paul Gainey. More on the case against Francis Tumblety after the break. Welcome back to the trial of Jack the Ripper and the case against Francis Tumblety. Central to the prosecution's case is their claim that Tumblety possessed the specialist skills and expertise necessary to carry out these murders. James Morton, please call your next witness.
I call Dr. Ian Hill.
Dr. Ian Hill is a Home Office pathologist who has worked on dozens of high-profile murder investigations.
Very, very briefly, how were these women murdered?
They were probably grabbed from behind, their throats were extended, they were cut, and then they were mutilated.
Wynne Baxter, the coroner, at one of the inquests said that the killer had been someone with considerable anatomical knowledge and skill. Would you accept that?
Whilst the killer may have had anatomical skill, he certainly did not exhibit any medical skill.
No, but he knew where things were in the body.
He may well have done.
Yes. Those are uteri, or supposedly so. If a man had a collection of these which he exhibited at dinner parties, would you say that that was indicative of somebody who might well collect them and purchase them?
I would say it was probably indicative, but it was also indicative of somebody who was quite deranged.
Thank you, James Morton. Thank you. Angela Rippon, your witness.
Dr. Hill, Wynne Baxter, the coroner, was not a medical man, was he?
No.
Dr. Thomas Bond, the police surgeon at the time, the man who committed the post-mortem on Mary Jane Kelly, he was an eminent surgeon. He says, as far as he was concerned, that the wounds could have been inflicted by a person who had no scientific or anatomical knowledge, not even the technical knowledge of a butcher or a horse slaughterer. Why should we take the testimony of Wynne Baxter above that of Dr. Thomas Bond?
He was talking about the wounds and not the removal of the organs.
Let me just ask you to comment on this. The bodies were slit open. As a doctor, you will know that once the skin is removed, that what will happen is that the intestine will automatically fall out.
Not necessarily.
But there's nothing to hold it in. It's very easy then for it to be taken out, is it not?
It can be removed, but it doesn't necessarily fall out.
But it's very easy to take out. We've actually taken the liver out of this model to make this a little more easy. The Ripper took out the intestine and put it over the shoulder of his victims. Now, once you do this, you have the peritoneum here, which covers most of the inside of the stomach. However, the kidneys are very, very clear and would very easily be removed. Presumably someone using the kind of knife that the Ripper was supposed to have used, which was 6 inches long and extremely sharp, he would have had the kidneys, the liver, the sexual organs all sitting there behind the peritoneum, very easy to be removed. Clearly he would not have needed, whoever the Ripper was, any medical knowledge, would he?
You have omitted one important fact.
Which is?
That there's a layer of fat which covers the kidney. And I did not say that he had skill. I said that he could well have had anatomical knowledge, and the two are quite different.
But you would not have, what I'm saying is, you would not have needed particular knowledge if the kidneys would be sitting like the size of my fists behind that peritoneum, behind that layer of fat. They would have been very obvious and very easy to remove. Is that not
It's
true?
very easy to remove, but that does not
remove
the fact that he may...
Thank you very
That's all
much.
I need to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Fred West and Dennis Nielsen, two of Britain's most notorious serial killers, shared many characteristics. But does Francis Tumblety have a similar criminal profile? James Morton, please call your last witness.
I'll call Dr. Cleo van Velsen.
Dr. Cleo van Velsen is a consultant psychiatrist who works with murderers in a secure mental unit.
How would you describe Tumblety's personality?
From the evidence that we have, he seems to have a severe personality disorder marked by a need for admiration, grandiosity, a lack of empathy and antisocial tendencies. And he's very clear that women are a source of humiliation for him.
He's at least a bisexual.
Yeah.
Does that stop him killing women?
No.
There are plenty of examples.
Well, there certainly are people, for example, Rosemary West entered into homosexual and heterosexual relationships with the victims that they killed.
These, as it were, trophies which he kept in his living room, what would you have to say about them?
Well, Tumblety talked about women as sort of cattle. He talked about them as the sort of source of sin and dissipation. And I think that by taking their wombs and displaying them, he was really attacking them and demeaning them.
Now, there's no doubt that the killings stopped after Tumblety leaves England, but he lives a long time. Possibly there are some more killings attributed to him for 6 months, but certainly we know of none for some years. How would he come to stop?
Well, one possibility could be that because he was, because of his age and because he suffered from some ill health, that he might have become impotent, for example, in which case the function of the serial killing, which is to kind of make him feel potent and strong, has lost its purpose. And that might be a reason he would stop.
Thank you very much indeed. Defence your witness.
Dr. Van Velsen, Tumblety certainly was a quack doctor. He was a showman, a con artist, and he hated women. But where is the evidence that he was also a sadistic and violent killer?
I think the evidence, for example, of the wounds, that would give you an indication. I mean, he's not going to walk around with a sign saying that he was a sadistic killer, but he might actually display trophies or objects that demonstrate what he feels about women.
But many doctors can have these objects lining their surgeries, and in fact he had barely, 10% of his collection was of women's wombs. In the circumstances, is that really so unusual?
I would be very freaked out if I went to a dinner party where somebody referred to men as cattle and then showed me a sort of a hot jars full of scrotums.
You might be freaked out, but would that prove that the person that you were with was a sadistic killer?
I think it would prove that they were sadistic, yeah.
It would prove they were sadistic, but not necessarily a killer. Is it not true also that serial killers do tend to continue killing until they are either caught or for some reason they're taken out of circulation?
I think they do tend to. But of course we don't know about those ones that have never been caught.
Except that in this case we do know, as far as Tumblety is concerned, that from 1893 to his death in 1903, he lived very quietly, a respectable member of society in Richmond in America with his sister. 10 years in which he would have had every opportunity to commit further murders, but did not. Can you explain that?
If he had become impotent, then the point of the serial killing, which is to gain some sort of sexualized relief through orgasm, will have gone, so therefore he might not need to kill
But that
again.
would be unusual, because serial killers...
It would be unusual.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you, Dr. Van Velsen. Angela Rippon, you now have your chance to tell the jury why Francis Tumblety is innocent as charged.
Yes, he was a con man. He lied, he was a charlatan, but that does not necessarily mean that Francis Tumblety was a killer. Let's face it, we've heard there is not simply sufficient evidence to back that up. He was a dodgy quack who just happened to be in London at the time of the killings. He was 55 years old. He had that very distinctive handlebar moustache. He was said by the New York Times to be over 6 feet tall. That does not fit the description of any of the witnesses at the time. The reason that very few people named Tumblety as Jack the Ripper is because at the time there was no reason to do so. It would therefore be a mistake to do so now.
That concludes the case against Francis Tumblety. He was a society doctor and royal confidant, but was Sir William Gull a serial killer?
In 1888, Sir William Gull was probably the most influential doctor in Britain. Although 71 years old and despite suffering a stroke, he was the personal physician to the royal family. Incredibly wealthy, Gull lived in London's exclusive Mayfair and was worth the equivalent of £15 million in today's terms. But he served a royal family in crisis. Republican feeling had grown as Queen Victoria became a virtual recluse and the public learned of the playboy antics of the Prince of Wales and his son Albert Victor. Gull died at his London home in 1890 following a second massive stroke.
Representing the prosecution is Jonathan Goldberg QC, a senior barrister. He has worked on over 100 murder cases and has previously represented Charlie Cray. The prosecution will be assisted by Andy Parler. To defend Sir William Gull, broadcaster Jeremy Beadle, an enthusiastic crime historian assisted by Shirley Harrison, who has written a best-selling book on the Whitechapel murders. Jonathan Goldberg, what is your case?
Originally the poor son of a canal boat owner, the multimillionaire society doctor, royal physician, and well-documented sadist Sir William Withy Gull was the man who expertly cut out the vital organs of 5 prostitutes with the necessary surgeon's precision. The 5 women, all friends, could have exposed a scandal which would have toppled the English monarchy. Queen Victoria's favourite grandchild, Victor Albert, Duke of Clarence, had secretly married a pretty Roman Catholic tobacco seller. Their baby daughter had been abandoned in turn to a foster mother who fell into prostitution. The clownish efforts of the police to catch the Ripper were intended to fail. The commissioner himself, Sir Charles Warren, was a prominent Freemason like Gull. He orchestrated a cover-up in order to protect Gull and the ruling establishment, as we shall prove.
Thank you very much indeed. Jonathan Goldberg, your first witness for the prosecution is your assistant, Andy Parler. Andy Parler has spent the last 8 years researching the life of Sir William Gull and has written a book on the very subject.
Mr. Parler, you are from Thorpe le Soken, the home village in Essex of Dr. Gull, are you not?
Yes.
And you also happen to be a relative of Polly Nichols, the Ripper's first victim.
Yes.
Tell us shortly about the Duke of Clarence, Albert Victor, and his illegitimate baby.
Yeah, he fathered a child, and the child was put in the care of a prostitute. She went back to the East End of London. And then one by one, the establishment got rid of them, and Gull was the one who done it.
Now tell us, please, about the oral traditions in the village where you live and Dr. Gull lived.
The oral traditions have been handed down from father to son. Even today, children are told not to go near that grave. That's the grave of Jack the Ripper.
Tell us now about the article which appeared in the Chicago Herald in 1895.
It clearly stated that Jack the Ripper was a well-known West End doctor who had access to the royal family.
Could this have been anyone else but Gull?
It couldn't have been no one else but Sir William Gull.
And was it indeed taken as such at the time?
It was, yes.
Thank you very much. Defence, Jeremy Beadle, your witness.
Andy, how old was William Gull at the time of the murder?
71.
When did he have a stroke?
He had a stroke in 1887, well over a year before.
A year before.
A year
so
before
we've got a
the
man
murders.
who had a stroke, he's 70 years old, and he's able to go out to the East End?
Yes, he was able to go out to the East End because that illness was gradually exaggerated. Within 3 weeks of having that stroke, he was back in practice and going around the country giving lectures.
And doing athletics, I'm sure.
Yeah, I
Now,
believe
tell me, where's your evidence? Where are the police reports?
The police reports, well, the cover-up.
I'm sorry, no.
A
I don't know about
conspiracy and a
conspiracies.
cover-up.
Just tell me, where are the police reports?
Well, you tell me.
Well, I don't think they exist.
Oh, no, because they were destroyed.
Where are the newspaper reports?
Likewise, the newspaper reports reported in the Chicago Herald.
Ah, the famous Chicago connection,
Yeah.
which I may add, just turns around and says that Dr. Howard went into a club and boasted that he knew the secret of the Ripper.
Yes.
And
yes.
this is evidence.
Yes, and he lived just round the corner from William Gull.
Oh, he lived just round the corner from
Yeah,
William.
when he lived in London, yes, in Hanover Square.
I see. Can I ask you one final question? Do you believe in Santa Claus?
Yes.
Oh,
Andy
good.
Parler, thank you very much indeed. At the heart of the prosecution case against Dr. Gull lies a conspiracy theory. But would the royals really sanction murder to cover up the truth? Jonathan Goldberg, please call your next witness.
I call Max Clifford.
Max Clifford is a celebrity spin doctor who has exposed the indiscretions of Geoffrey Archer, David Mellor and countless royals. He has also broken the story of Will Carling's alleged relationship with Princess Diana.
Max Clifford, is it conceivable in this great country of ours that the ruling establishment and the royal family would ever indulge in cover-ups?
Oh, yes. A dodgy lot. Will we ever know the truth about Diana and Dodie? We still don't know half the answers, and I don't suppose we ever will.
What would be the reaction even today if young Prince William were to go off with a tobacco seller?
Well, it might be a little bit more difficult to cover up, but they would do their best to do everything they could to cover up anything which would in any way embarrass or endanger the royal family.
And finally, have you yourself ever been pressured to drop a story?
Frequently.
Can you give us some
particularly when I'm trying to expose rich and powerful people. I've been offered financial inducements and I've been given physical threats. If you're going against people that are rich and powerful, then you have to be prepared to face up to the consequences. That's a fact of life.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Your witness.
Max, have you got any idea how many illegitimate have been born to the royal family?
In what period are we talking about? The last few months? Or?
No.
I mean, I think going back, there must be, you know, loads. But,
Well,
you know,
there are indeed. I mean,
yeah.
Henry I,
They're always at it.
father 24, William IV 10, Charles II at least 16. And in fact, if this conspiracy theory to cover up an illegitimate child was true, history would be littered with the corpses of royal children. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, but then, of course, it was very easy in those times to cover up anything you wanted if you were in the royal family. It didn't require any work because the media left you alone.
Max, as a person who's famous for exposing scandal, a lot of the public don't realise that a lot of your work is actually stopping scandal from ever hitting the press. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, probably the biggest percentage dealing with major stars is keeping things away which will cause them problems or embarrassment, yeah.
So if you were handling this illegitimate child of the prince, would you suggest, is there an alternative way other than murdering 5 women to keep it quiet?
Well, of course, in today's society, yes, there's all kinds of ways. You can do deals and you can come up with other stories, or you can come up with somebody else.
Do you think the press was manipulated in Victorian times?
They were totally controlled. They weren't manipulated.
It would have been quite easy to hide this scandal from the public.
Very easy, Jeremy. I mean, you know, nothing was read about the royals if they didn't want you to read it.
Thank you, Max.
That's a pleasure.
Thank you. Max Clifford, thank you very much indeed. After the break, we'll hear more evidence in the case against Sir William Gull. Welcome back to the trial of Jack the Ripper and the case of Sir William Gull and the royal conspiracy. The final piece of prosecution evidence rests on the argument that Sir William Gull had enough friends in high places to cover up his crimes. Jonathan Goldberg, please call your last witness.
I call Martin Short.
Martin Short, an author and journalist, has spent 20 years researching the secret rituals of Freemasonry.
Mr. Short, what part does secrecy play in this organisation, please?
It's absolutely paramount. The main point about the secrecy is it conceals membership of Masonry from people who are non-Masons, and they have various forms of recognition. And it's reinforced by various oaths and penalties in the various degrees of Freemasonry. The first degree penalty for revealing Masonic secrets is that of having your throat cut across and your tongue torn out by the root. In the second degree, you have your breast torn open and your heart dragged out. And in the third degree, you are severed in two and your bowels are burnt to ashes.
And are there similarities in that ritual with the way in which some of these mutilations occurred?
Well, I understand that most of the women had their throats cut. I think one had the tongue torn out, and several of them were disemboweled, so it does bear a startling resemblance to Masonic ritual.
And intestines placed over the left shoulder, as you know.
This, again, is also part of Masonic ritual.
And please, Sir Charles Warren, then the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, a retired general. What was he to Freemasonry?
Well, he was an ardent Freemason. As Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, he was well placed to rub shoulders with other Freemasons, which would have included members of the royal family, politicians, and also the medical profession.
Thank you. Your witness, defence.
Thank you. Martin, was Sir William Gull a Freemason?
Well, the records at Freemasons Hall are very inadequate on this score, and indeed they are, throughout the 19th century, quite chaotic. So, in fact, as far as I know, there's no certificate to prove that he was a Freemason, but there is some other evidence.
But no actual documentary evidence that Gull was a Freemason.
There is.
So it is quite possible he wasn't a Freemason to begin with.
It's possible.
OK. Can I ask you, if the Freemasons are so secret, do you really think that it's a very good idea to go around murdering women, which dominate the newspapers around, remembering trying to keep this secret, and then advertising the ritualistic aspects of the killings by advertising that this is a Freemason doing it.
He was suffering from mental illness, I think, towards the end of his life, and therefore he could easily have transferred the Masonic rituals from the murder of a Masonic brother to some prostitute, maybe, who was believed to be about to spill the beans on some royal illegitimacy.
Wonderful piece of fanciful theorising. Thank you, Martin. One final question. We don't know that he was a Freemason. Do you think it's a good idea that people should keep murder secret?
Well, I would have thought it was obvious that people would keep murder secret. And
so it's rather foolish to advertise it's a Freemason doing it?
Well,
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Martin Short. Jeremy Beadle, may I ask you to make your closing statement for the defence?
I apologise for being a bit hard on Andy Parler. He's a wonderful researcher, and on Martin. But the truth of the matter is that we have absolutely no real evidence about Gull either being a Freemason, or we're also asked to believe that at 70 years old, a man who has just had a stroke is capable of going into the East End and bumping off 5 healthy women. This is the wonderful stuff of blockbuster movies, but not the world of fact. As for that famous article in the Chicago paper, well, everybody was trying to say that they knew who Jack the Ripper was. He was a butcher, he was a Jew, he was a sailor, he was a woman. So a person walks into a Chicago club and boasts, hey, have I got the inside knowledge on Jack the Ripper? No. I have to say that William Gull was a nutty toff, but he was not Jack the Ripper.
Thank you, Jeremy. That concludes the case against Sir William Gull and the royal conspiracy. Next in the dock is Liverpool cotton merchant James Maybrick.
By the autumn of 1888, James Maybrick was 50 years old and virtually leading a double life. In public, he was the perfect image of Victorian respectability, a wealthy middle-aged cotton merchant with a rich, beautiful wife, 20 years his junior, and a lavish home in Liverpool. But there was a darker side to Maybrick. He consumed large amounts of arsenic, and his frequent business trips provided the perfect cover for his regular visits to low-class brothels and gambling dens. But it was Maybrick's death which really hit the headlines. He died in 1889, apparently poisoned with arsenic. His wife Florence was found guilty of his murder in one of the most notorious trials of the 19th century.
Leading the prosecution is broadcaster Jeremy Beadle. He has built up a library of books on this case. Jeremy will be assisted by Shirley Harrison, who has written a best-selling book linking Maybrick to the murders. And defending Maybrick, we have James Morton. He is assisted by Nick Warren, who edits a magazine for Ripper enthusiasts. Jeremy Beadle, what is your case?
Joseph Goebbels, Dennis Nielsen, Ted Bundy. 3 sadistic mass murderers, bound together by more than just their gruesome crimes. All 3 were simply unable to resist the thrill of confessing all on paper. Prepared to risk everything, they all kept diaries, and so did, ladies and gentlemen, Jack the Ripper. Tonight we will show you how he spilled the sordid details of the Whitechapel murders over 63 gruesome pages. Tonight we will introduce you to the man behind the diary, the cotton merchant from Liverpool who led a double life, James Maybrick. Tonight, as well as proving that he had both the motivation and the mind of a killer, we will show you that James Maybrick, whose family motto was "Time reveals all," that he wrote the diary because he simply couldn't resist not doing so. He simply couldn't bear the idea that someone else might be named as the killer.
Thank you very much, Jeremy Beadle. Your first witness for the prosecution is Anne Graham. Anne Graham discovered the Maybrick diary in 1993. She lives and works in Liverpool. Jeremy.
And first of all, can we establish this is the first time that you've spoken about the diary on television?
Yes, it is.
Can you tell us, how did you find the diary?
In 1968, we were moving house, and I discovered the diary at the bottom of an old trunk.
How do you think that the diary came into the possession of your family?
Well, my father told a story that his grandmother was a friend of Alice Sharp, who was one of the servants at Battlecrease House.
What makes you think that James Maybrick wrote the diary?
Because the contents of the diary could only really be known by somebody from the Maybrick household.
So we've now established a link between the diary and James Maybrick.
Yes.
For security reasons, the diary has to remain in a secret location. But we were given special permission to film it. Here's our first piece of video evidence.
Former publisher Robert Smith bought the diaries in 1993 and now keeps them in a bank vault in North London.
It is amazingly intimate as a diary. I think we learn all kinds of things about Maybrick's mind, the way his family operated, his feelings towards his children, towards his wife. I thought there was a lot of hatred shown towards women in this book. Whoever was writing it, it just didn't strike me that this was a spoof and someone having a joke. I just thought it was, in many ways, a thoroughly nasty document, but one possibly which could have been written by a psychopath.
Various forensic tests have been carried out on the diaries. The paper was found to be Victorian, but 5 separate ink tests and handwriting analysis have proved inconclusive.
When you look at the diary handwriting, it does not look immediately like the writing of the only known document that we have by Maybrick, which is the will. I just don't think I have enough information to say this is definitely the diary of Jack the Ripper. But I think we do have enough information to say this is an old and, I think, Victorian document.
Please continue, Jeremy.
And when you first read the diary, how would you describe the contents?
Oh, they're gross. I mean, it's the ravings of a lunatic. He was saying how he murdered women.
Jeremy, I think at this point you'd like us to hear an extract from the diary itself.
I have read all of my deeds. I had to laugh. They have me down as left-handed, a doctor, a slaughterman, and a Jew. Before I have finished, all of England will know the name I have given myself. It is indeed a name to remember. It will be before long on every person's lips within this land. Perhaps Her Gracious Majesty will become acquainted with it. I give my name that all know of me, that history do tell what love can do to a gentleman born. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper, dated this 3rd day of May, 1889.
Defence, your witness.
These diaries have been repeatedly challenged.
Yes.
And it's right, isn't it, that one reputable forensic scientist has said quite specifically that the ink is wrong.
Well, that was one particular expert said that. I think another particular expert has said quite the opposite.
And you've heard your own publisher say that he cannot say that that is the diary of Jack the Ripper.
Yes.
Would you accept that you and a great number of other people have in fact been hoaxed?
No, I don't think so. It seems fairly genuine to me.
Can I read you a little bit? I thought it a joke when I cut her breasts off, kissed them for a while. The taste of blood was sweet, the pleasure was overwhelming. One of these days I will take the head away with me. I will boil it and serve it up for my supper. I mean, this is just sort of penny dreadful stuff.
Well, I can't comment on the contents of it. What you see is what you get.
Thank you. And Graham, thank you very much indeed. Crucial to the case against Maybrick is his state of mind at the time of the murders. Prosecution, please call your next witness.
I call Michael Farrell.
Dr. Michael Farrell is a consultant psychiatrist at the National Addiction Centre in London. Your witness.
Thank you. Michael, it's been established that James Maybrick was an arsenic addict. Why would anybody take arsenic?
In the 19th century, arsenic was a popular content of tonics and was frequently consumed across all of Europe. It was popular as a sexual aphrodisiac and taken to help sexual performance. And Maybrick was actually a common frequenter of brothels where also the prostitutes consumed arsenic.
Can you tell us how arsenic would affect the mind of an addict?
Well, it can result in serious mental instability, hallucinations, paranoia, and loss of memory.
So, knowing the history of Maybrick, as you do, and his addiction to arsenic, do you think it's possible that he was Jack the Ripper?
Well, he could have both had serious instability from chronic arsenic poisoning and also could possibly have had syphilis. So he would have been mentally unstable.
Thank you, Jeremy. James Morton, your witness.
Thank you very much. In fact, I think the word you pick up particularly is hallucination. I mean, this diary could be a complete hallucination.
That's true.
Yes. And it's right, isn't it, that many people make false confessions?
Some people do, yes.
Well, I think, for example, would you accept that in the Black Dahlia case, the Los Angeles case in 1947, I think something like 50 people confessed when they couldn't possibly have done it?
This is a common problem for police.
It is a common problem. And so, assuming the diary is genuine, all one can say is it is just as likely that it's either a fake confession or just complete hallucinations.
That's a possibility.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farrell. Originally, the case against Maybrick centred on his medical history and the validity of the diaries. Then later, in 1993, some extraordinary new evidence was uncovered, which on the face of it seems to support the Maybrick case. Jeremy, can you call your next witness, please?
I call Albert Johnson.
Albert Johnson is a retired security officer who lives in Liverpool.
Albert, thank you for coming in. Do you have the watch with you?
Yes.
Can you, first of all, very briefly, tell us how it came into your possession?
I bought it from my granddaughter in a jeweller's in Wallasey in 1992.
Sometime later, scratches were found. Can you tell us what exactly the scratches were?
Yeah, there was 5 victims of the Ripper, which was Andy Chapman, Mary Carey, Mary Nichols, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes.
It had their names or their initials?
Just the initials.
Anything else?
Underneath was James Maybrick, the signature, and on the top was I am Jack.
Can you tell us what you did with those scratches, please, Albert?
I took them to Manchester University. Professor looked at us and he said that he thought it was genuine, you know, that they were years old.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Defence your witness.
In fact, that really is a lady's watch, isn't it?
I don't know whether it's a gent's or a lady's, but I should imagine it's a gent's watch. A gentleman would wear this for a ball, you know, which is a bit smaller than an ordinary working watch, but a bit larger than a lady's watch.
Thank you very much. Albert Johnson, thank you so much indeed. Now, defence, may I have your closing statement on why James Maybrick is innocent as charged?
Even assuming, and I don't accept this for the moment, that Maybrick did write those diaries, what do they amount to? Complete ramblings, no facts, no figures, no dates, nothing at all, no corroborating evidence whatsoever. Maybrick may have been a bad husband, he may well have been an adulterer, he may well have frequented brothels. There's probably evidence for all those things, but what there certainly isn't any evidence whatsoever is there's no evidence he was Jack the Ripper.
Thank you very much indeed, James. Morton. That finishes the case against James Maybrick. After the break, could a Polish impoverished Whitechapel barber be Jack the Ripper? Welcome back to the trial of Jack the Ripper. Our final suspect on trial is Aaron Kosminski.
Very little is known about Aaron Kosminski. No photographs exist and there are few other records of his life. A Polish immigrant, in 1888 he was about 23 years old, living and working in Whitechapel as a barber. On the surface, he was fairly typical of the thousands of other Jewish immigrants who flooded into the East End to escape persecution in Eastern Europe. But Kosminski was mentally ill, possibly schizophrenic, and was admitted into an asylum 18 months after the last murder. He died at Leavesden Asylum in 1919.
The prosecution of Kosminski is led by Angela Rippon. Angela Rippon will be assisted by Paul Begg, who has spent over 10 years researching the life of Aaron Kosminski. Conducting Kosminski's defense are Jonathan Goldberg, QC, and Andy Parler. Angela Rippon, what is your case?
Jack the Ripper, a criminal phenomenon, a multi-million-pound industry that has spawned dozens of books, hundreds of films. You can even go on a guided tour of his murder sites in Whitechapel, all of it contributing to the idea that he was some sort of criminal genius, an exceptional killer, a colourful maverick. But the brutal fact of the matter is that he was not. Serial killers are not exceptional people. They are not glamorous or rich or even involved in any sort of complicated political cover-up. They are sad, tortured individuals who have failed in life. Now, the police know that now, just as they did in 1888. And that is why Aaron Kosminski was their prime suspect. He was poor, he was desperate, and he was literally insane enough to kill. And tonight, I will prove to you that Aaron Kosminski was Jack the Ripper. You may not want to believe that someone so ordinary could become the most notorious serial killer in history, but so compelling is the evidence that you, the jury, will have no choice but to convict Aaron Kosminski.
Thank you, Angela. Now, Angela, your first witness for the prosecution is John Grieve. John Grieve is Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police and chairs its Historical Society. He is currently in charge of the Racial and Violent Crime Unit at Scotland Yard. Your witness.
Mr. Grieve, without the scientific and medical advances that detectives have nowadays, like DNA and fingerprinting, what sort of hard evidence would they have been able to amass in 1888 against Kosminski?
Eyewitness testimony, intelligence from the community, compelling patterns of evidence, confession evidence.
And in fact, Kosminski was at one time named and identified as the killer, was he not?
Yeah, the 3 senior police officers connected with the case, 2 actually name Kosminski, and 1 describes somebody who is clearly the same man that the other 2 officers are describing.
Now, we've heard them described at the time as clownish. How capable do you believe the detectives were, the senior detectives who were in charge of the 5 murders?
Well, they ran a massive house-to-house inquiry. They detained a number of suspects who they cleared. They collected a huge amount of evidence from the communities, and to my mind, they collected piles and piles of evidence.
And just remind us very quickly of the
material
names.
that's still collected to this day.
Just remind us quickly of the people who were the main players.
Sir Robert Anderson records the description of a suspect. Sir Melvin McNaughton names Kosminski, and most important, Donald Swanson, a detective chief inspector who worked closely with Frederick Aberline, who is the man who actually investigates the case. He names Kosminski in a secret note that he never expected anybody ever to read.
I'd like now, please, if I may, to call my first and only piece of video evidence.
I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that my grandfather knew who the Ripper was.
Jim Swanson's grandfather was Chief Inspector Donald Swanson, who was responsible for the day-to-day handling of the Ripper investigation. In 1981, Jim Swanson discovered some of his grandfather's old papers in which he made a remarkable discovery. Donald Swanson had thought he knew who the killer was and had left a note of it in this book.
My grandfather knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew exactly who the suspect, the prime suspect, was, namely Kosminski.
How compelling do you believe that evidence is?
I think that those officers had evidence that a jury should have heard, and I think that's what they believed.
And based on that evidence, would Kosminski be your prime suspect?
I think if I was walking in Aberline's footsteps, I would want to interview Kosminski and I would want to put the evidence in front of a court. I find Kosminski a more compelling suspect than anybody else I've heard talked about here tonight.
No more questions.
Thank you. Jonathan Goldberg for the defence.
Assistant Commissioner, I'm sure we can agree on these matters with a yes or no answer. It's right to say that the police never closed the files on an unsolved murder, yes?
Yes.
Let alone one so sensational, of course. Yes? It's right to say that half the papers have gone missing from Scotland Yard files.
No, I wouldn't say half the papers have gone missing. There's a huge amount of paperwork collected. There are some papers that people have claimed to have seen in the past that are no longer available.
Well, where have they gone if there's not been a cover-up?
There's lots of places papers could go over 120 years that don't amount to a cover-up, Mr. Goldberg.
But these murders were the sensation of their age, the biggest case the Metropolitan Police had ever had, you will agree.
I agree, sir.
The investigation, in truth, was just a charade or farce, was it not?
No, it was a huge inquiry, thousands of house-to-house inquiries, lots of bills of descriptions of people, a reward posted. Doesn't ring like a charade to me.
Is it right that your force used clairvoyants?
They used clairvoyants,
and
they used dogs. Yes, precisely, sir.
And burly male officers dressed as prostitutes who got beaten up on occasion?
No, they used people disguised in a variety of different ways, Mr. Goldberg.
If there had been a shred of admissible evidence that this poor Polish Jew were the Ripper, why was he never arrested?
Well, I think that's probably the question we don't know the answer to.
Why not? Because of papers missing from the file, Assistant Commissioner?
No, probably because there just wasn't sufficient evidence to put him in front of a court at the time, Mr.
I ask
Goldberg.
you again, where have these missing papers gone, do you suppose?
It's classic conspiracy theory, Mr. Goldberg. You can't find something, therefore it's a conspiracy theory and a cover-up.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much indeed. John Greed. So can the prosecution prove that the Kosminski named by Scotland Yard was in fact the Aaron Kosminski charged here today? Angela Rippon, please call your next witness.
I call Paul Begg.
Paul Begg has conducted an in-depth study of the life of Aaron Kosminski.
How do we know that the Aaron Kosminski who is on trial here tonight is indeed the Kosminski who was put into a mental institution in 1891 and therefore the most likely Ripper suspect?
Because the asylum records were checked by a writer called Martin Fido, and he did a thorough check of the asylum records, and Kosminski is the only K-anything ski that he could find in the records. And this has been confirmed somewhat by work that's been done in searching through the death registers and death certificates.
Kosminski is also the only one of the suspects who actually lived in Whitechapel, isn't he?
That's right, yes.
Would this have given him exclusive knowledge of the area?
Very likely, yes. He would have certainly been aware of a lot of the alleys and small passages.
What do we know of Kosminski's state of mind?
Not a great deal, really. Not for what he was like in 1888. We know that in 1891 he was a fairly sad character, wandering around the streets of the East End, picking food out of the gutters, believing that he knew the movements of everybody in the world, hearing voices and seeing things. But what he was like in 1888, we don't know.
And what do we know about his feeling towards women in particular and prostitutes in particular?
It's said by Macnaghten that he had a hatred of prostitutes, but again, we have no direct evidence for that.
But we are quite convinced that the Aaron Kosminski that the police believe was the Ripper is the man who was committed to a mental asylum in 1891.
Yes, absolutely. Anderson gives us about 7 pieces of detail, and Aaron Kosminski fits all of those details. He was male, Polish, a Jew. He lived in the heart of the district, and probably the clincher is that Anderson says that his suspect engaged in utterly unmentionable vices. Aaron Kosminski's medical records say that he indulged in self-abuse. All of these are Victorian euphemisms for masturbation, which at the time was believed to cause all kinds of illnesses, everything, I suppose, from hairs growing on the palm of your hands through to outright insanity.
No more questions, thank you.
Thank you. Defence, your witness, Mr. Goldberg.
Kosminski is, of course, a common Polish name, something like Brown in this country, is it not? Answer yes.
Well, it would certainly be, may well be a common name in Poland. It certainly wasn't that common here.
The East End was full of Jews.
Yes.
It was full of male Jews.
Yes.
It was full of Polish Jews, white Polish Jews, who perhaps masturbated.
Probably.
So those are the unique features that cause you to say, quite seriously to this jury, we have positively identified the right Kosminski.
Now, I say that those are the reasons, that's what Anderson says, those are the details that Anderson provides, and that Aaron Kosminski fits those details.
And of course, McNaughton, the policeman writing later, is the same McNaughton who said it was masturbation that caused Kosminski to go mad, am I right?
Yes.
Do you find that reliable?
No.
The reality is that Kosminski was a convenient patsy in an age of anti-Semitism where the press were howling for a suspect and calling him indeed Jacob the Ripper. Am I right?
No. I don't know of any evidence to suggest that any of the policemen concerned were anti-Semitic or were behaving in any anti-Semitic way.
But it was the perfect patsy to cover up a member of the establishment who was really responsible, I suggest to you.
Well, if we're going to get into the conspiracy theory, then
Indeed.
yes, that is what you could say.
A nutty local Polish Jew.
Thank you. Thank you indeed, Paul Begg. A crucial element in any prosecution is establishing the suspect had a motive to kill. Angela Rippon, please call your final witness.
I call Ian Stephen.
Ian Stephen is a forensic psychologist who has worked with dozens of convicted murderers.
Ian Stephen. We knew that he hated women. We knew he hated women, prostitutes particularly. Would his mental condition have been one that would have been likely to make him kill?
Well, I think that if the hatred towards women boiled up inside him and became so intense that it had exploded, I think he would have then been at risk for killing women.
The killings became more and more violent and frenzied. Why would he suddenly stop?
I think the only likelihood of him suddenly stopping is if his mental condition changed abruptly. If, for example, he was traumatized and overreacted to, say, an intense experience of the episode of killing, I think this may have fragmented him and turned him into mentally ill.
Well, Mary Kelly, of course, was particularly savagely brutalized. Is that something that could have turned him?
Well, I think that's possible because of a different type of killing from the previous ones. And I think the severity and the intensity of it was almost like a fool acting out of his fantasy. And I suspect this could possibly have converted him into a fully blown mentally ill person.
Does his profile at all compare with any 20th century killings?
I think we've plenty of evidence from the recent past with Dr. Shipman and people in sort of the Yorkshire Ripper and so on who've been able to carry on normal lives while at the same time running parallel to this. They're carrying out these very serious crimes.
Thank
you very much indeed.
Your witness, defence?
Well, I have here extracts from the records of the Colney Hatch lunatic asylum where Kosminski was incarcerated. Did you know that his weight was 6.5 stone, a tiny man physically?
I think his weight may have been the consequence of the illness and the process which led to him being eventually admitted to the hospital.
Did you know that he was recorded as being, I quote, a dull and stupid man who required constant attention?
Yes, indeed I do, but this is possibly the aftermath of burnout after a very severe outburst.
Let me continue. Do you know that he was recorded as being, quote, not dangerous to others, that he was never placed in a straitjacket, which of course they were not shy to use in those days, that he ate food from the gutter and drank water from the sewers when at liberty in the East End, that he was described as quiet and well-behaved. Did you know all that?
Yes, and many serial killers who are imprisoned or incarcerated in hospital present exactly the same kind of presentation.
What about this? Did you know that he is recorded as only speaking Yiddish?
Well, he
might have had some trouble entering the prostitute's bedroom, don't you suppose?
Well, he didn't say he spoke to them.
Do you seriously suggest that such a man is capable of committing 5 meticulously planned murders undetected, Doctor?
Well, nobody ever said he was a criminal genius, and the violence was all perpetrated prior to his institutionalization.
I say again, psychobabble.
Thank you. And Stephen, thank you very much indeed. Jonathan Goldberg, may I ask you to make your closing statement, please?
Poor Aaron Kosminski was the classic patsy and scapegoat, and all the better for being a Jew in an age of rabid anti-Semitism and anti-immigrant feeling. This pathetic and utterly docile imbecile, who spoke no English and ate from the gutter and drank from the sewers, is of course the other side of the coin of the establishment which protected Dr. Sir William Gull. Not a shred of evidence exists against this poor man. A few marginal notes by Inspector Swanson, written years after the event, prove nothing. What more needs to be said to demonstrate his innocence?
Thank you, Jonathan. After the break, our studio jury will make their judgment on who was Jack the Ripper. Welcome back to the trial of Jack the Ripper. We have heard the cases against our 4 suspects, so which one is the real Jack the Ripper? Sir William Gull, the royal doctor, prepared to do anything to protect the crown he so revered. Aaron Kosminski, the Polish barber suffering from schizophrenia. Francis Tumblety, the American quack doctor with a pathological hatred of women. And finally, James Maybrick, the Liverpool cotton merchant, obsessed with his adulterous wife. Just before we ask our studio jury to deliver their verdict, we'll hear 4 brief closing statements. First, Angela Rippon. Why should our jury convict Aaron Kosminski?
Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, you have absolutely no choice but to convict Aaron Kosminski. He was named by 3 of the most senior police officers of the day, one of whom states categorically there is no doubt whatsoever as to the identity of the criminal, and another states Kosminski was the suspect. He was also positively identified, a paranoid schizophrenic whose mental state deteriorated rapidly from 1888 to 1891. And there is absolutely no proof whatsoever that even though he only spoke Yiddish while in the mental institution, that he did not previously speak English. The police believe that Kosminski was the Ripper, and so must you.
Thank you, Angela. Jonathan Goldberg, QC, why should they convict Sir William Gull and the royal conspiracy?
Ask yourselves these questions, please. Why were the files of Scotland Yard plundered in their most sensational ever murder case? Why was nobody ever charged? Why were investigating officers sworn to secrecy? Why do the secret rituals of Freemasonry surface time and again in the evidence? Do you doubt that the ruling establishment of any country, and especially this ancient country, will stop at nothing to protect itself from scandal? And this was an age of rising republicanism, and there had been 5 attempts on the life of Queen Victoria. Members of the jury, open your eyes. Do not be gulled. He did it.
Thank you, Jonathan Goldberg. James Morton, this is your chance to convince the jury of Francis Tummelty's guilt.
So far as Tumblety is concerned, he's in London. There's evidence that an American doctor was in the East End on the night of the killings. There's evidence that he was a trophy hunter. There's evidence that he disliked women intensely. There's evidence that he fled to America immediately after the last killing, and there are no more killings in London so far as the Ripper is concerned. The police fancied Tumblety as the Ripper. They were never able to prove it because he then disappeared to South America. But there is no doubt in my mind and I am sure not in yours, that Tumblety is Jack the Ripper. Thank you.
James Morton, thank you very much indeed. And finally, Jeremy Beadle, your last chance to convince the jury of the case against James Maybrick.
The Maybrick Diary is the only major archival material naming the killer, other than the uncorroborated police suspects, which has emerged since 1888. There is no proof that it's a modern forgery. In fact, scientific evidence supports the belief that it's at least 70 years old. Maybrick was an arsenic and strychnine addict, a syphilitic brothel user who had a very violent temper, who often attacked his own wife. So we have the confession of the diary, but most of all, in my mind, the Maybrick watch, which has been scientifically tested by 2 major laboratories, proving that the scratches are not new. Those scratches, which contain the initials of all 5 Jack the Ripper victims, and the exact signature of J. Maybrick, and the words, "I am Jack." And finally, may I remind you that Maybrick's family motto was, "Time reveals all."
Jeremy, thank you very much indeed. Now is the moment for our studio jury to reach their verdict. Each of you has an electronic console with 4 buttons. If you think it is Kosminski, please vote 1. James Maybrick, vote 2. Sir William Gull, vote 3. And Francis Tumblety, vote 4. Please vote now. Is it Kosminski, Maybrick, Gull, or Tumblety? And we expect the computer to have finished its processing, counting the votes of 100 of our jury here in the studio, a representative sample of the British public. Any moment now. Here they come. Here come the votes now of the 100 members of the jury here in the studio. Maybrick is ahead. That is the final result. Maybrick is Jack the Ripper.
Intelligent audience. What an intelligent jury.
Congratulations, Jeremy Beadle. Our studio jury were convinced that James Maybrick killed in a drug-fueled haze and then confessed all in an intimate diary. Desperate to be discovered, he even engraved his watch with his grisly confession. James Maybrick was Jack the Ripper. To our studio jury, our advocates, our witnesses, and of course everyone watching at home, thank you and goodbye.
It all ends with murder. In Tales from the Black Museum, coming next.
Some murder of 5 women, but were they right? Now it's time for you to have your say. He's the world's most notorious serial killer, a monster who terrorized Victorian London with the vicious murders of 5 prostitutes. Earlier this evening, our studio jury heard the cases against the 4 principal Ripper suspects. In the dock were American quack doctor Francis Tumblety, Liverpool cotton merchant James Maybrick, Polish immigrant barber Aaron Kosminski, and Queen Victoria's personal physician Sir William Gull. The verdict was a close one, but after weighing up the evidence, our studio audience named James Maybrick as Jack the Ripper. But as with any murder trial, the defendant has the right of appeal. For the next half hour, you can cast your votes for who out of the 4 suspects you think is the guilty man. You can vote by calling the numbers on your screen, or via our website, or by pressing the red button on your digital TV remote control. But this is also your chance to put your questions and theories to our Ripper experts. If you have a point to raise, call us now on 0870 9090 212. We'll be taking your calls throughout tonight's programme before revealing your verdict at the end. Our operators are already busy, but before we go to the phone lines, let's remind ourselves how the trial against the man convicted as the Ripper, James Maybrick, unfolded.
Maybrick was actually a common frequenter of brothels.
He spilled the sordid details of the Whitechapel murders over 63 gruesome pages.
Complete ramblings, no facts, no figures, no dates, nothing at all.
But most of all, in my mind, the Maybrick watch.
The professor looked at us and he said that he thought it was genuine.
Maybrick's family motto was, "Time reveals all."
We'll go to our first call straight away. Maria Bauer from London. I think you don't believe in the case against Maybrick.
No, I don't. I think the diaries were a hoax, but I think even if they were authentic and it could be proved that Maybrick wrote them, I still think they're the ramblings of a madman. So I don't think the diaries prove anything in particular.
OK, Shirley. Shirley Harrison, you're the expert on the diaries.
Yes, hello, Maria.
Try and convince Maria.
The fact that it's the writings of a madman may be so. I think James Maybrick was indeed deranged. What the diary has done, and it isn't a diary, by the way, it is simply a confessional. What the diary has done has shown James Maybrick to be a very likely suspect in his own right, even if the diary is a forgery.
What would it take to convince you, Maria?
An awful lot more, I think. I'm just not... I don't think Maybrick did it at all.
OK.
Yeah.
We'll move on to, I think, Neil Hunt in Birmingham. What's your point about Maybrick, Neil?
Yes, I've got a question regarding the diaries. Is the handwriting in the Maybrick diaries the same as in the letters sent to the police by Jack the Ripper?
Shirley.
There's a great deal of dispute about the writing in the Jack the Ripper letters. Some of them, I think, are genuine and some of them aren't. There are some letters that were sent in Scotland, allegedly by the Ripper, which are very similar to some of the writing in the diary, but I think the comparison between those two is probably not
Andy Parlour, you're another of our experts. You don't believe that Maybrick did it?
Well, no, because all the information...
What's your point? The point about the handwriting, then?
Well, the handwriting is entirely different from Maybrick's handwriting. His will is in a fluid style, and the writing in the so-called diary is just stuttered writing, and all the information could have been gleaned from any of the newspapers and books that have been written since the...
Big difference of opinion there, thank you. Move on to our next call, Matthew Berry from South London. Matthew.
Hello there, yeah. I was inclined to agree with the first two callers. I think the writings in the diary seem a little bit melodramatic, if anything, which would tend to make me believe that they were perhaps forgeries or made up by someone.
Do you think there is a case against Maybrick without the diaries?
No, there doesn't seem to be very much evidence other than that. I mean, perhaps he was mad or he'd taken a lot of arsenic, but I don't think there was any evidence other than that really presented.
Am I allowed to say something?
Yes, please do, Shirley.
He was very familiar with Whitechapel. He had a mistress who lived in Whitechapel. He had a business partner on the edge of Whitechapel. His family originated from Whitechapel. In Liverpool, he grew up next door to the Museum of Anatomy, and he was well familiar with gruesome...
Matthew, who are you voting for?
I thought it was Tumblety. I thought there was several things about Tumblety that made me think it was him. The way he kept the body parts in jars was particularly that showed his sense of his view of women, and that anyone who has a moustache of that size has got to have something to hide.
Thanks very much. Well, let's move on to the case against our next suspect, the American Francis Tumblety.
Tumblety fits everything. He decided he was going to collect and exhibit human body parts.
He's very clear that women are a source of humiliation for him.
They were cut and then they were mutilated.
This man left behind a bloodstained shirt. The landlady described this man as an American doctor.
He was said by the New York Times to be over 6 feet tall. That does not fit the description of any of the witnesses at the time.
He's always been a suspect. He was a suspect in 1888. He was in the American press.
James Peake in North London, you've got a question about Tumblety.
Oh, yeah. We heard evidence that Dr. Tumblety was a homosexual, but under the cross-examination, I think it was the psychologist but psychologists have said that homosexuals don't usually kill women. So from like a profiling, psychological profiling point of view, his guilt would be doubtful, wouldn't it?
Paul Gainey, you're the expert on Tumblety.
Yeah. There's a lot of nonsense talked about homosexual killers who can't kill women. There's a lot of examples of homosexuals who kill women, Vacher, Peter Curtin, Chikatilo, homosexuals who kill and mutilate women. Now, what's important about Tumblety, of course, is he's not homosexual. This is a mistake a lot of people make. He's actually bisexual. He married, and in his writings he talks about relationships with women. So he is not homosexual.
Paul Begg, do you agree with that? You're not a Tumblety man, are you?
No, but I would agree with with what Paul has said.
Okay. We've got lots of emails. You're bombarding us with emails. Jane Leather from St Helens. Were there any similar murders in America after Tumblety returned? Seems odd that such a frenzied killer would stop and just go and settle down living with his sister.
Well, what we do know is that when Walter Andrews chased Tumblety to the States, he disappeared. Now, then a series of murders started in Jamaica and Nicaragua, which was so similar to the Whitechapel murders that the police in London sent details of the Whitechapel murders to police in Managua. And we know that Tumblety was a huge traveller. We know he had travelled to Central America before. So the question is, did he move on to other places and carry on his killing? Is he the first travelling serial killer?
OK, we've got lots of calls waiting. Gordon Hamilton in Lanarkshire, Scotland. What's your question about Tumblety?
Sir William Henry Gull, it was Tumblety.
Tumblety. We're moving on to Gull shortly, but do you...
Oh, sorry, right. Tumblety was 55 years old at the time in the 1900s. A man of this age, would it be possible for him to commit a double murder 45 minutes spaced apart?
Well, I think the answer to that is yes, because he's the exact age of Christie when he carried out his murders. But I do contend, of course, that Tumblety did not kill Elizabeth Stride.
Can I just...
Yes, please, very quickly,
well,
Andy.
Regarding Tumblety, he was arrested, and if he was a prime police suspect, A, why was he released, and B, why wasn't he tailed and followed every move that he made and been allowed to escape? If he was such a suspect, he would have been followed by the police and followed all the way.
Thanks, Andy. A lot of your calls, a lot of your emails have been captured and captivated by the conspiracy theory. So let's move on now to our third subject, the pillar of the establishment, Sir William Gull.
Sir William Withy Gull was the man who expertly cut out the vital organs of 5 prostitutes.
And one by one, the establishment got rid of them.
Several of them were disemboweled, so it does bear a startling resemblance to Masonic ritual.
This is the wonderful stuff of blockbuster movies, but not the world of fact.
Why were the files of Scotland Yard plundered in their most sensational ever murder case?
Even today, children are told not to go near that grave. That's the grave of Jack the Ripper.
Another email from Sinead in London. The victims' bodies were mutilated with a skilled hand, either a surgeon or a doctor. So surely Sir William Withy Gull, the Queen's surgeon, is absolutely the most likely suspect. Shirley?
Well, I understood that they were not mutilated with any particular skill at all. I think that the insides were torn out. There was no particular...
Andy Parler, you're the expert on Sir William Gull. You're a Gull man, aren't you?
Yes, I'm a Gull man. Now, if the insides were torn out, they had to be cut open in the first place, and the cuts were done by a surgeon using a surgeon's knife. And Gull, contrary to a lot of belief, was interviewed by the police, because we have on the report that Lady Gull was infuriated by the questioning by the police. Gull had blood on his shirt and suffered from memory lapses, and he said he couldn't recall where he got the blood from.
OK, I've got to interrupt you there, Andy. We've got a caller, Lindsay Siviter in Oxford.
Hello there.
Hello, Lindsay.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to make a couple of points about the case against Gull. Previously, Mr. Goldberg stated that Gull was a well-documented sadist. Well, being his official biographer, I'd like to point out that there's no evidence whatsoever to prove that. Secondly, the argument was that Bill was a Freemason. The more research I do, is the more I feel that he was not. I have not found any evidence yet that he was. And in a memoir written just after his death by a close friend, he actually writes, forms, ceremonies and dogmas were never greatly in harmony with his mind. His own beliefs and faith were very individual, private, and based mainly on his passion for nature.
OK, let's ask Andy, who is the expert here.
Well, I've spoken to a Freemason of high standing, in fact, above the level of 14th Arch, who categorically says Gold was a Freemason, and part of the cover-up was that these Freemason membership papers were removed from the files, and that's why that was part of the conspiracy and the cover-up. They were gone.
Paul Begg, quickly.
Andy, one thing I don't quite understand, under the Royal Marriages Act, any marriage not given the sovereign's approval would be null and void. That Queen Victoria would have to give Prince Eddie approval, otherwise the marriage was void. This surely takes away the whole impetus for Gold sort of carrying out these crimes.
OK.
Can I just say, Michael?
Yes, quickly.
That there were 13 surgeons' physicians in 1888 in Queen Victoria's medical department. I suggest you pick on another one from the list.
OK, thanks for your call. It's still not too late to cast your vote for the guilty man or to put your point directly to our panel. We'll be back in just a few minutes with more of your calls and the final verdict. Join us in a moment. Welcome back. There's just a few minutes left now before we find out which of our 4 suspects you think is the real Jack the Ripper. But it's not too late for you to vote or join in the discussion here, so get online and vote and keep those calls coming in. Here's one from Left Field panel. Online question from Ian Richardson in Usk, South Wales. Do you have any view on author Patricia Cornwall's theory that Walter Sickert the painter was actually Jack the Ripper? Paul?
We don't know all her evidence just yet, and so we have to wait until her book is published. But
he's come up before, though, hasn't he?
He's come up before, but the evidence against him is never very persuasive.
Doesn't match.
And what Patricia's come up with doesn't sound very persuasive either.
Andy?
Walter Sickert was more or less a failed musical artist. That's probably why he turned to painting.
It was a publicity stunt, was it?
A publicity stunt. He was an exhibitionist, very colourful character, but certainly not Jack the Ripper.
OK.
I must say, I wish I'd had the money she's had for research. At least I've got something positive to research.
That's probably one thing we all agree on.
Well, let's move on from speculation and hypothesis to the last of our actual suspects. Let's remind ourselves about the case against the poor, wretched Aaron Kosminski.
I have absolutely no doubt my grandfather knew who the Ripper was.
He was poor, he was desperate, and he was literally insane enough to kill.
Aaron Kosminski was the classic patsy and scapegoat.
He would have certainly been aware of a lot of the alleys and small passages.
Aaron Kosminski was Jack the Ripper. The police believe that Kosminski was the Ripper, and so must you.
Chen Woodward from Redhill, what's your query about Kosminski?
Well, my point about Kosminski probably is of the 4 suspects, he probably had the best local knowledge, and as was already stated, he would have known the alleyways and the back passages very well.
You think he did it?
I do. I think he would have been able to move about the place, if not unseen, then probably unnoticed. And I think the other 3 suspects you have wouldn't have done so easily.
Thanks. Is this an important point, Paul Begg? Kosminski's your man, isn't he?
Yeah, well, he's the man I think we should be paying most attention to.
Is this an important point that he had familiarity?
Yes, I think it's a very fair point to make, and it certainly would play a great part in any assessment of his guilt. OK, Samantha Drinkwater in London.
Hello.
Hello.
My point is, out of all of the suspects, Kosminski had most of the profile of a serial killer. He seemed to be quiet and unassuming when out in public. He also had a pathological hatred of prostitutes, not necessarily women, but prostitutes. And they seemed to be opportunistic murders. They were not meticulously planned. So it seemed that these women were killed because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Also, he was proven to be an attention seeker. And also Jack the Ripper wrote a lot of letters to the police, which is another profile of the serial killer that does. In most serial killer cases, they've written letters to the police force, or they've tried to help out.
Pretty convincing stuff. Andy Parlour, you're a Gull man, so...
Well, not really on Kosminski. He more or less only spoke Yiddish, so I shouldn't think he'd be able to write. He was just weak in mind, weak in body, weighed less than 7 stone, hardly the man who had the brain to plan and kill 5 women, disappear and not get caught.
All of which dates from after 1892, whereas Ian Stevens on the programme
still weak in mind. He was still weak in mind.
Well, you don't have to be particularly bright
and weak
to
in
murder
body.
somebody.
He ate out of the gutter.
Paul, you want to come in, Paul, mate?
All it was that Anderson asserted that he knew, but even Macnaghten, who was his successor, didn't agree with him and went for Druitt. So, and also, crucially for me, Chief Inspector John Littlechild, in his letter, said Anderson only thought he knew.
OK, I think we just want to make sure that we've got people still voting and it's not too late to contact us online. Steve Jeffries of Ensworth.
Oh, hello.
Hello, Steve.
Thank you. The point I'd like to make is that I very much think that it's Maybrick who is the murderer. I think there's many reasons to believe that. Like the first thing,
give us one good reason that we haven't heard.
Right, Catherine Eddowes, her list of possessions came known to the public in 1987. Well, in the Ripper diary, he makes note of this tin box. And he said, damn it, the tin box. Well, the Ripper knew about this empty tin box, and he knew about this.
Paul Begg, have you got a view on this one?
It could be taken one of two ways. The fact that the diary mentions the tin box, which nobody knew about until 1987, would indicate that the diary was written after 1987.
Andy Parr's bursting to
There's
get
a report in the Times that mentions the tin box. Yes. The report of the Times in 1888 mentions that tin box.
We've got an email from Chris Taylor of London. If Kosminski is the Ripper, then why did the killing suddenly stop? Even though the police remained unaware of him for 2 years, it can't be Kosminski.
Sorry, could you repeat that one?
Yes, if Kosminski is the Ripper, why did the killing suddenly stop, even though the police remained unaware of him for 2 years?
Yeah, because his brain went at the end of after the murder in Miller's Court.
Okay.
I think one of the
Rusty Miller, let's go to another call. So many people trying to get in. Rusty Miller. Rusty Phillips, excuse me, Rusty. Hello? He hasn't paid his phone. Rusty, are you there? No? OK, Shirley, sorry, your point was...
I was just going to say that one of the interesting things about Maybrick, too, is that he was killed, or his wife was tried for his murder within 6 months of the last killing in London, which puts him out of the way. That trial was a very suspicious affair altogether.
OK. Cheryl Telfer in London, what's your point, Cheryl?
Oh, my point is about the Maybrick's diary. The handwriting specialist that was unable to verify the handwriting in the diary with the handwriting of Maybrick in his will, and the two handwritings appeared to be very different. Therefore, I put it to you that it was a Jack the Ripper sympathiser that would probably wrote the diaries and not Maybrick himself.
Andy, do you have a view on that?
Well, regarding the diary, for a start, it's turned up, it's been found in 4 different places so far. It was given to Michael Barrett, it was found in a trunk, it was found behind some pipes, it was found under floorboards of an house when it was being rewired. So where was the diary found?
Shirley, if the diary were proved to be false, would there still be a case in your view against Maybrick?
There is a case against Maybrick without the diary, and I think that the answer to this is going to come not through scientific testing at all, it's going to come through historical research.
Quick last call. Greg Morgan of Gloucester.
Hi, how are you?
Hello, Greg.
Right, Aaron Kosminski, I mean, they must have got the wrong man. There's nothing to connect this man with the Rippon murders whatsoever. Macnaghten, which you mentioned, Paul, during the trial, Macnaghten described him at one point, apparently, as being a cobbler nicknamed Leather Apron. I mean, surely he's got the wrong man. Swanston mentioned that he died just after he was incarcerated. In fact, he lived a further 30 years. They got the wrong man. There's nothing to connect Kosminski there at all.
Thanks, Paul. Very quickly.
Modern researchers may have misidentified Kosminski. That doesn't take away from the fact that the police at the time seemed to have thought that it was Kosminski.
Why didn't they arrest him?
Well, they did, and they had an eyewitness identification, but they had to let him go for reasons that we don't know. But the fact is that basically and nobody has provided any evidence to suggest that there wasn't a witness, that there wasn't a suspect, and that there wasn't an eyewitness identification. So if we take those three things actually
I have to interrupt you there. We have a verdict. We have the views of the people at home. Well, we asked for your views on which of our 4 suspects was Jack the Ripper, and your response has been phenomenal. You have voted in your thousands, and we can now reveal that verdict. And the verdict is, with 39% of your votes, Maybrick is Jack the Ripper. The jury has spoken and has confirmed the verdict of the original trial. Liverpool cotton merchant James Maybrick killed 5 women in a fit of drug-induced madness, then confessed all to his secret diary. You have voted James Maybrick was Jack the Ripper. You're not surprised, are you?
Not at all, no. I think it was a very well-presented case. Not the right one, but well presented.
No, and I've lived with this man for 10 years, so to speak,
well,
so I'm
thanks.
not surprised.
Thank you to all our experts here in the studio and to you for watching. Thank you very much indeed. That was your verdict. Good night.